Right, how is everyone? Pretty early morning for everyone. Yeah, thanks for turning up so early on the final day of PASS Summit. Obviously, you've probably seen all these slides before about silencing cell phones. And I guess if you don't know about PASS by now, you're probably not going to. But there is a lot going on. This is my first time presenting here. I've been involved with PASS for quite a while at the local level. I looked after the user group, been a regional mentor in Australia. I'm here now after about 6 or 7 years involvement in PASS. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I wouldn't mind doing that, have a go, get involved with your local groups, reach out to people. It's not too hard. Get something good to talk about and you'll find yourself going places. So yeah, please fill in your session evaluations, not just for this one, for all the ones that you've probably seen so far or are going to go to later on today. So my name's Martin Catherall. I basically do anything to do with SQL Server in Melbourne, Australia. Obviously, some of you might have picked up, I don't have an Australian accent. I'm originally from the UK. I spent about 30 years of my life in the UK, first late 20s, early 30s. Moved to New Zealand, my wife's a Kiwi, got 2 little boys over there. And then about 4 years ago, we moved to Melbourne, Australia. And very soon we'll be moving to Brisbane. So I've been getting around a little bit. So I'm just going to talk a bit. And while I talk, I'll just flash up a few words on the screen that have basically got to do with the subject that we're talking about. Some of which might surprise you, and some of which might not. Some of which we'll talk about during the next hour, and some of which we won't. So the keynote yesterday was pretty good. Who decided to watch the keynote yesterday on live stream? Okay, one person over there. I decided to watch the keynote yesterday on live stream. One of my flatmates got up and had a headache and said, oh, I'm just going to stay in and watch it on live stream. And I thought, well, I'll do the same. And it was going great until he introduced the speaker. And then it went totally dead. And I was thinking, oh, there's a technical problem there. So I waited. And then a session came on from last year, a security session. And I was like, oh, they'll fix it in a minute. And it took me about 20 minutes to work out that they were going to fix it, that it was totally intentional. And then I came down to the conference center and caught the last 20 minutes of the presentation. I thought that was pretty good. Hopefully that gave people things to think about, because it's a massively interesting subject, I think. There's a lot of problems that are, seemingly unsolvable, chicken and egg problems. And yeah, it was a really good presentation. I've looked at that lady's book since, and it's very good. So if you're wanting to buy it, I would maybe have a look at it. Well, there's some things here that you might initially think like, oh, what's that got to do with like privacy or like master data management, data quality, getting your data in order, not duplicating it, all that sort of thing. Yeah, but a lot of it's common sense, just things we overlook. Just being aware of things. Tagging your data, we'll look at things like that as we go forward. Quite a busy slide, but essentially what we're talking about is like looking after secrets. Some of which, are not massively secret. You get just your name and things like that. We obviously want people to know it, but you don't want everyone to know it. Obviously, you don't want your social security number and things like that getting out there. And as well as managing secrets for other people, you've probably got to manage your own secrets as well. And that's got a cost to it also. So basically, that's the agenda for the day. We'll talk about keeping secrets, moving and changing secrets, sharing them, and then if any of you have got questions or even statements you want to make, please shout them out. You don't have to wait to the end. Make sure to see you, and that's kind of fine. So Yeah, technology just changing really fast. That's no surprise to probably anyone in this room. And the security thing is changing quite fast as well. Not just the technical aspect of it either. The legislation and that's coming in different parts of the world that might not or might affect you. And we'll probably talk about if you should pay attention to that sort of thing as we go forward. Social engineering, though, that's probably something we overlook. Obviously, this is a bit of a funny comment. Probably none of you would fall for something like that. But people within your organisations that, we trust people within our organisations, but other people might not trust people within the organisation. So, acting professionally and that sort of thing is definitely advised. So, usernames, obviously, the commonly email addresses are one form of secrets. Passwords are probably the big one. We absolutely do not want to share those things. And obviously, personal identifiable information. That's information that maybe on its own is kind of, your name on its own is no big deal for people to know, but taken in collaboration with other things like your date of birth, your social security number, could be very valuable to someone who wants to use them in a manner that you don't want them to be used. So what's the overhead of all this security? And that's actually an interesting question. Obviously, in terms of time, it takes time to do things, time to secure things, time to look for passwords, time to get access to places we want to get access to. And that all costs money. And obviously, that has got to be passed on to our clients in some way or another. And that'll just raise the cost of the goods or whatever it is that we're selling. And people can change their, their bank accounts or their service providers or whatever very, very easily nowadays, So if you're not cost effective, people will just walk away from your business, and that'll obviously have a knock-on effect to your jobs and that. So managing security, compliance, privacy, all that sort of thing is a massive deal, and it's got consequences far beyond what we would normally think of. So what can we do to help us there? Well, we can use things like standards. And I see a lot of people not using standard mechanisms at all, because they think that if they use standard mechanisms, other people will use standard mechanisms too. They'll know what they are. They'll be more vulnerable and that type of thing. But that's not entirely true. We can avoid things like passwords by using things like Windows Authentication, Azure Active Directory integration, and then we don't have to manage passwords at all. But that's not. Is that a real world thing that we can do to not manage passwords? Having good, strong, well-tested processes is something that's quite often overlooked, and making sure those processes can't be circumvented by the culture of your organization. So let me tell you a story about something that happened to me a while ago, quite a long time ago actually. So I worked for a government agency in New Zealand who were looking after basically they were a statistical agency in New Zealand, doing things like the census and GDP and that sort of thing. And during I think it was 2006 census, they'd moved a lot of data from production to development and test on quite a regular basis. And nothing untoward had happened to them at all, but they'd had internal feedback that this wasn't a good thing, and people were like uncomfortable because New Zealand's a small place, and identifying people in databases is probably quite a bit easier to do than maybe it is over here. Okay, so they said during the next round of the census, well, we've had feedback that this is not a good approach to what we're doing, so basically we're not going to do it anymore. So great, you're not going to move your production data into non-production environments. Fabulous. However, a bit later on, when the census was going strong, they hit a little bug. Now, I looked at it and I didn't think it was a massively critical bug, but people start to panic. And one of the testers came to me and said, can we move the production database to development? And I was like, well, I don't like saying no to people, but I've learned that you've got to, in a lot of cases, as I'm sure a lot of DBAs know in this room. So saying no without saying no is probably a great skill to develop. So I was like, well, I don't know if that's a great idea. Explained why I didn't think it was a great idea. But I was like, if you really want me to move it to development, I can do that for you, but you'll have to get sign-off from, your release documentation. So she goes away and puts in this change request, and I put down on it that I don't think it's a good idea and blah, blah. And anyway, the next level up decided to pass it to the next level up, and it went up a couple of levels, but eventually got signed off. And I was quite amazed. So I'd made it clear that I didn't agree with it. But when the going gets tough, people get, and there's no laws or anything in place or processes to safeguard this sort of thing, people will make decisions that are irrational, maybe good for them, but not good for other people. And it's not great. So obviously, that's an example really of kind of a culture where people are prepared to overlook processes for their particular gain. And nothing untoward happened there, but it perfectly could have. A lot of the data breaches that we see today are caused by sort of production data going into non-production databases and being exposed accidentally. And that's a big deal. But if we never put that data into non-production environments, then we're safe on that front. But that seems to be something that people don't want to do. Another thing about culture that I guess we should try and encourage is, like, if you see something, say something. So how many people in this room would say security is actually part of their job? So yeah, so pretty much everyone. So regardless of if it's in your job description or whatever, you probably should be looking out for things that could be improved, or things that could be security holes. Or, I got asked the other day to share my credentials with someone, and I pointed out that was not probably, I was uncomfortable doing it to start with, because the password I had in there was something that I definitely wouldn't want to divulge. But anyway, long story short, I didn't end up doing it, and the person went back and got a new login set up and all that. But the fact that they'd asked me in the first place sort of demonstrates that, I don't know, maybe they weren't taking the whole thing entirely seriously. So let's talk about just keeping secrets in general. So how do you manage passwords at the moment? And that's not just the passwords of your users that log into the system, which obviously you might want to do that. You might want to use encryption or something like that in your SQL Server database. But what about your own passwords? The passwords that you use on a daily basis to maybe get into the Azure portal, or to log into Pass, or to log into any other website that you've got yourself. How do your organization manage passwords? And is that the same thing? Do you manage them in the same way? I mean, if you're a consultant and you've got 6, 7 passwords to get into the same place, do you manage them in the same way you'd manage your own personal passwords? Do you just remember them? Do you write them down? Do you keep them in an Excel spreadsheet? What do you do? And there might be alternatives. People have got different strategies, obviously. Some people have got good memories and do remember them. Other people write them down. It's a bit embarrassing when you see people opening spreadsheets and you can see all the passwords. But are there other alternatives? The people here, who uses a password safe? Password manager, yeah. So that's a great thing to do. I first got introduced to them a few years ago, well, more than a few years ago, using fairly simple ones. But they raised a question about being on the network. I mean, who looks after the password safe? Who looks after backing it up? Who looks after restoring it? How many copies of that get used? There's a whole bunch of questions around this. And choosing one is a big deal. So I personally use 1Password. I find it quite secure. But one of the big questions I had was, so I'm saving all my passwords in this one place. What happens if that one place gets breached? And obviously, I wouldn't want that to happen. 1Password sent me a key that I need to, as a piece of information to access my passwords. And as well as that, I use a big long passphrase. Something like, I went to the Pass Summit and had a really great time and went to Pike Place Market. A big string like that. So those two things combined make it pretty secure. Now, obviously, there's still a chance, however minimal, that might still get breached. So what can I do there? Well, as we heard yesterday, planning for the worst case to happen is something that you probably should have in the back of your mind. But one of the additional steps you can take is to turn on multi-factor authentication. Download an app like the Microsoft Authenticator, which will go on your phone. Just another piece of information that you need to gain access to a website. So for those who are unfamiliar with it, Authenticator apps just show numbers. For example, say I wanted to get into my Microsoft account. The first time I set it up, the web page displays like a barcode. I'll scan it with my authentication app, and then from that point onwards, my authentication app will say, for your Microsoft account, you're going to need this key, this number, and that number will change every 30 seconds. So I've got to basically type that number in to get access to the site. And you'll set different ones of them up for different sites. But there's quite a few apps there. I mean, I said I use 1Password. That's a big one. LastPass is another one that I got introduced to at a client I was working for. But then you can end up using, multiple ones of these. And one of the questions I had was around using this for my personal work and also my private work. So I use 1Password, but I worked for a firm a while ago who didn't seem to have any sort of security strategy around the management of passwords. They just got their clients to basically issue passwords, and I had to deal with them myself. So I ended up putting them into my 1Password, and that's my own personal 1Password. And nothing untoward happened there. at all, but it kind of made me think, if one of those clients had some sort of security breach and started investigating who had what, and they found out that I was keeping the passwords in my own safe, how would they feel about that? I mean, when I'd finished my work there, would they cut my access off? Because a lot of people don't. They'll just like leave your access open. And so potentially I'd have access to their network all the time, regardless of whether I used it or not. And if you've got access to something, regardless of whether you've used it or not, you potentially are in the frame for causing some sort of security issue or data breach. And I guess that's something that we as DBAs see every day with people who want additional access than they actually need. So having a good strategy, and I was actually going to show password managers here, but it seems like the majority of the room are already using them. So I won't go into that. So, but developing a good policy and culture around passwords is a really good thing to do. Yeah. Okay. So I talked about a bad culture example before at the place I worked at in New Zealand about sharing data from production environments to non-production environments. But here's a worse one, and some of you might have seen this already. So this lady here is an MP in the House of Parliament in the UK. So she tweeted out that all the staff have their login details, and a frequent shout out when I manage to sit at my desk myself is, what's my password? So she obviously shares her password. So I reckon that if anyone in this room decided to share their passwords in their own organisation, they'd probably be up for some re-education or maybe even some disciplinary action. But then they kept on digging. Another MP tweeted that he certainly shares his password and has to ask his staff for it regularly. And then the lady tweeted back with more stuff about how she shares her password. And then obviously someone asked the obvious question, does anyone know what's going on here? So, okay, so I've got a link at the bottom of this article, and that is a really interesting article to read. Not because it's the article itself. Basically, what I've just said here is what the article says. But the interesting thing about this article is the comments down the bottom. You know, people have actually took screenshots of regulations that happen at the British House of Parliament. And one of them is clearly not sharing passwords. And this obviously demonstrates that we probably all know in this room there's ways of getting access to other people's email that don't involve having their password or sharing passwords. So the process here was don't share them. The culture was, well, you know, it's too hard to go talk to IT to get them to set up some sort of system where we can easily do this. So we won't talk to IT about all this security stuff because it'll take too long, and we'll just go breaking the rules. And I think that's, I don't know, obviously a very high-profile example of probably things you shouldn't do. Yeah. So what can you guys do to help manage your secrets in today's world? And there's probably been some great presentations on some of these technical things here at the past summit. I mean, using things like managed service accounts. So you don't have to have an individual account running each of your SQL servers. So if you're running 100 SQL servers and they're potentially running under the same account, but you put that account in separately on each individual server, and then you want to change that password, maybe then you've got to visit 100 SQL servers to change the password. And that's a manageability nightmare. So by using managed service accounts, you can do a similar thing, but when you change the password, you'll change it in one place, and you can even get the system to look after it for you. Transparent data encryption as well is something that we can easily turn on our databases. I think it's probably one alter statement. Will encrypt your data at rest in your database. So your data itself in the database, it's not encrypted at all, but at rest on the file system, your NDF files and NDF files and MDF files will be encrypted. One of the big benefits of that is when you take a backup, in order to restore that backup, you need the certificate that was used to encrypt the data in the first place. So to me, obviously the encryption of the data at rest is very good, but the big benefit is basically the encryption of the backups and the fact that you're going to need the certificate that was used to back up the database to restore it to production or whatever you need to restore it. So, I mean, if you are sharing databases or, taking backups of sensitive data and sharing them with your development environment, then that potentially stops people walking off. Well, not necessarily walking off with a backup, but stopping people restoring them in places where they shouldn't. So you obviously need a good policy around certificate management. And I think there are some things that scare database professionals because they appear to be massively difficult. And there's a few examples of that in SQL Server, I think. Certificate management is possibly one of them. Obviously, you're going to need to change certificates on a fairly regular basis. You might need to transport them between different machines. And you just generally might need to upkeep them. And if you have to do that, you don't want to be Googling away. I'm sure everyone could transport certificates here, even if you've never done it before. You could probably sit down, Google for a while, find some good blog posts by people in this room and in this building at the minute, and find out how to do all this stuff. But you don't want to be doing that in a situation that's time critical, like anything. So taking a bit of time to practice these types of things and get good of them so that if you do have to do them in time critical situations or under pressure is an excellent idea. Okay.
Just to remind people, if they want to go to the past website, my session on Wednesday has a step-by-step guide.
Yeah, so Tom over here did a session the other day about a deep dive on encryption. I might show some encryption stuff in a little while, but it'll be fairly basic. But Tom's got a step-by-step guide on how to encrypt data in your database. I just talked about transparent data encryption. He's took it to a different level where he'll show the encrypting columns and so on and so forth. So if you missed Tom's session, please go to the past website, download his session as well. Use it in conjunction with, some of the information that you've heard here and in other places, and hopefully get to the stage where you're a bit more secure. So what?
And also about moving certificates around. It's also in the step-by-step guide.
Oh, okay, that's. Yeah, great stuff, Tom, great stuff. So while I'm giving a shout out to people about this, there's another session, I think it follows this in 618. Martin Kearney, who has got a very similar name to me and also lives in the same place as me, and we used to work together. So occasionally we get each other's email. Anyway, he's a great guy, and he's doing a bit more of a deep dive on compliance and data tagging and all that sort of thing in 618 after it. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, please head along. But getting back to this, so I think one of the things we should do as DBAs is alter our mindset a little bit. You know, when I first started being a DBA many, many years ago, pretty much, you know, if I had to manage something, people would give me SA access. And I almost felt insulted if people didn't give me SA access. I was like, do you not trust me? You know? But now I've come to the conclusion that that's probably not a good approach. I mean, I could make a mistake, but that's not the real sort of reason, although it is a fairly valid reason. But you know, if I've got SA rights to the server, then potentially if something does go wrong, I'm in the frame for possibly making it go wrong, or breaching data or doing something like that. So that's a kind of a good reason, and you just got to. But people don't really know how to give lower permissions. You go to people at a client site and say, you know, I just need access to this table and these stored procedures to run it. And people are like, yeah, here you are, I think I've done it. And you're like, no, you haven't done it. And then they're like, oh, just have SA. Please, like, try and get out of that mindset and be comfortable with, you know, having less access. So I'm going to dive into a small demo that you might or might not have seen before. But before I do, I'll just kind of explain. So I went to a website, I went to a client site fairly recently, and they had a lot of their databases were made trustworthy. Now, some of them needed to be trustworthy, and some of them didn't. But they had a whole range of databases that were like that, and they said, like, you know, we want these databases to not be trustworthy, and if there's a reason they do need to be trustworthy, we want to know about it, and we want to try and work around it. And I was like, well, why is that? And they were like, well, we've heard that our developers or our DBAs or whatever, if they've got like just DBO access to a trustworthy database, they can potentially raise their privilege themselves to an SA. And I was like, oh, really? Okay, so I went and looked at this, and I'd never, ever looked at it before. So you might find it as interesting as I did. So I think I can just get up Management Studio. No, not. I think I can duplicate, can I? Yep. So just get up Management Studio. Nothing. So just to start off with, I'm just going to create a database. It's a brand new database just to show that I'm not hiding anything or doing anything here. So it's a brand new database. It's owned by, and I've set the owner to be SA. So let's just verify that. So yeah, there you go. Name of the database is Privilege Escalation, and it's owned by an SA. Okay, so let's create a brand new login. So our login is going to be called New Login to Escalate. So we've created a login on the server, and now, we've dropped the login if it existed, which it didn't. So let's create a brand new login. I've obviously broke everything I've been saying so far by hard coding the password in here, but it is only a demo. So please, obviously, don't do that. So let's create that as a login. Now we'll make the privilege escalation database trustworthy. We'll set the trustworthy flag to on, and we'll just go ahead and use that database from now on. So the login that we just created, our new login to Escalate, we'll create that as a user in our database. So now that login is a user in the database, and we'll make that login a DB owner. Right, okay, so we'll just verify that that login is not a sysadmin at the moment. So definitely not in there. And now I could change to another Management Studio window here, but I won't do that. I'm just going to execute as that login. So I'll execute as our new login to Escalate system user. And so everything I do from now on will be under that login. So just first interesting thing I see here, if you query sysexec sessions, obviously you do see the login name, who's logged in at the minute. But the thing that, I don't know, maybe a lot of people don't pay attention to is there's another column called original login name, which is the original login that I used. So the original login name is my Azure AD account, and the login name that I've escalated to is our new login to Escalate. So there you go. So as our new login, I'm going to create a stored procedure, which nothing special about the stored procedure, except that it's going to execute as the owner. So it's always going to execute as a DBO, and it's going to try and escalate me to a member of the sysadmin group. So, okay, so we can create that stored procedure, no problem. And just to show that statement on its own, even though I'm a DBO, on its own, I can't run that. I'll get, cannot alter the server role because it doesn't exist. So basically it's saying, you haven't got the privilege to do this. So that stored procedure that we just created was just called Elevate Me. So now I'm just going to execute that stored procedure called Elevate Me. So there you go. It's done. And I'll drop the stored procedure that I've just created that made me an SA. So that's removed. I've hid my tracks and that's gone. And now we look to see if my account is a sysadmin. And I am now a sysadmin. And we'll just revert our permissions, and I'll just clean up and drop that database. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that anyone in this room or DBAs in general are untrustworthy, and they'll do that type of thing. But it was a concern for this client, and I guess it's not something that I've ever seen people doing or talking about, but I got introduced to it as a problem from this client, and I was actually quite amazed. But while I'm in Management Studio, so I don't have to switch back later, there are some other tools here that might help you manage your sensitive data. So this sensitive data database here it's just got one table in it, lists people. And we might have sensitive data in there, in our database. So is there any sort of tools that we can use in here? Well, if you right-click on the database and you go to tasks, and this menu here seems to be expanding all the time, there's a menu item here where you can encrypt columns. I don't particularly use this myself, and it's just a wizard that you can follow through that. If you're unfamiliar with encryption, you can probably have a look at this. It will actually generate you I won't step through the wizard here. It will, at the end of the wizard, generate you a PowerShell script, not a T-SQL script, a PowerShell script. And you can go away and have a look at that and see how it applies its encryption. But one of the more interesting things is, again, right-click on the database, go to tasks, and come down to data discovery and classification. And I've just downloaded 18.4 Management Studio. It came out 2 days ago. Now, 18.3.1, which was the version before, only had these two menu items up the top, classify data and generate report. The other three are brand new in this version of Management Studio. And if you do go to Martin Kearney's session after this, I think he'll be diving deeper into a bit of this. But I'll just show the classify data. So we click on classify data. And I've already actually classified some columns here. I'll just delete them, and then we'll do it again. So I might want to say, so I've got my person database over here, and I've got some columns, and they obviously contain people's names. So I want to make sure when people look at this, they know that they're actually confidential. So I'll add a classification. I'll choose the schema, I'll choose the table. I've only got one table in this database, so it's highlighted straight away. I'll choose my column, I'll go my first name column, and the information I've got in there, I've got contact info. And I'm going to label that as, I'll keep it as confidential. So I'll just save that. And that hasn't saved. I refreshed it. Right, okay. Interesting. I went through this last night, and
Click the bar that says view down. 2 columns with classification and recommendations. The gray bar, the long gray bar.
here at the bottom.
Up top. Right there, almost.
Oh, view report. Okay.
Down.
Oh, that one. Oh, right. Okay. Yep. Sorry.
Oh, you got the report.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Okay. So it's saying I've got six columns in my database, and 0 of 6 are classified. Tables containing sensitive data. Yeah. This is. It's not working like I thought it would.
See that long gray bar? It says click to view right there.
This one.
Click that.
Okay. Right. Okay. Oh, okay. So this has actually changed very slightly since 18.3. Okay. So I've accepted those now, and I accept the selected columns. Right. And then I save that. Okay. Thank you very much for that. That's a bit more involved than it was the last time I did it. So. Okay. So I was looking at something last night, and I was wondering where that information was. I'm just going to check it live here now at the minute. I thought it went to sys extended properties. Sorry. There you go. So that information that we've just tagged in the database is stored in sys.extended properties. Although I don't know if you can see it if you go to this menu item over here. So I think if you've got this running on 2019, you don't see them in the extended properties of this dialog. But if you query sys extended properties, you will see them. If you've got SQL Server 2019, I believe that these are placed in a different location. But like I say, if you go see Martin in half an hour's time or an hour's time, he'll probably explain more about this to you. But they're just some of the tools that you have got available to you. And that whole thing there is pretty much brand new. Came out a couple of days ago. And you might want to go have a look at that and play with it. Yep, so there you go. Just thought I'd mention that while we were in Management Studio.
Hey, Mark.
Yes?
Something for people to know there is you turn around and classify that through the wizard. Be sure and go get remove them when you go to production. Okay, so be sure to go tag your actual source control table declaration, or otherwise you'll lose it.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, I guess that's two good points. Yeah, putting your DDL and scripts in source control is obviously a fantastic idea. But obviously that's got certain limitations, and if you want to add extended properties to a vendor database, for example, you may well be breaking their licensing agreement by changing their by adding data to their tables or changing their schema. So just be aware of that, and go have a look where it is in 2019. So I will try and get back onto my slides here. No. I'll extend. Come down to my... Okay. Right. So, yeah, there's a lot of myths about, and I guess trust but verify. Things like dynamic SQL, I don't know, people say they're always dangerous. I actually use dynamic SQL a lot basically to look at metadata and all that sort of thing. But if you use it properly, it can be fine. Obviously, if you use it incorrectly, it can open you up to some sort of security risks. But yeah, just be aware of that. And I just wanted to take a different look at some legislation, not dive into it deeply. But there's obviously stuff coming up in different parts of the world, legislating this stuff quite heavily. And, there's been some big fines. BA got a big one earlier this year. I think it was in the hundreds of millions of pounds. And it could have been worse for them. But what made it, I don't know if it's better or... Anyway, what made it not so expensive for them, because I think under GDPR, you can be fined 4% of your turnover for breaching these standards. So 4% of your turnover, that's not your profit, that's your turnover, is a big amount. So what helped BA reduce that fine was the fact that they knew what was stolen, they knew how the attack took place, and they were able to supply this to the auditors, and they basically self-reported it as well. So I guess all those things were taken into consideration as mitigating circumstances, and that helped them maybe not get such a big fine. But obviously that's no consolation to the people who had their data stolen. But in terms of looking at this, legislation that's happening in Europe, I mean, we're in America, so has that European data or that European legislation, should we bother paying attention to it? What's happening in California, is that relevant to us? I would argue, yes, it is, for two main reasons. So if you want to process data for people in the European Union, you'll have to meet these standards wherever you are. So that, obviously, if you can say I'm GDPR compliant, so I can store, process, do whatever with the data that you want me to do, you can obviously pull in new business. But apart from that, I think we shouldn't be looking at the law as being the moral minimum, so to speak. We should be looking around at other standards and saying, well, what are they doing? Because what's happening over there might happen over here at some point in the future. So paying attention to all that is a really good idea. And I'll just bring that back to a bit of an analogy with a technical thing. So a while ago when I was working in New Zealand, actually for the same government organisation again, one of the debates was, this about five or 6 years ago, one of the debates was, should we move to the cloud? And should we move to the Azure platform? And the answer for some of the organization was yes, that's fine. But for the team I was on, the answer was like no. And it wasn't really a technical reason. It was because there wasn't at the time, and I still think there isn't, any Azure data centers in New Zealand. So the closest one is Australia. So if they wanted to store their data in a data center, they'd have to store it in Australia, which takes the data out of the country. So the question for us is then, well, we're essentially never going to get to use this platform because it's mandated that we can't. But is it still relevant for us to look at Azure, specifically SQL database? And we sat down with our team and we decided that, yeah, it actually is still relevant. And it's relevant because there's things coming into Azure, well, there certainly were at the time, and there still are today, things coming into SQL Azure database that come into that product a year or maybe more before they make their way into the on-premise version. So essentially, we were looking at Azure SQL database as like an early adopter program, something where we could go and evaluate things like row-level security or always encrypted or other things that were in that product before they'd arrive in the on-premise product, which gives us a chance to evaluate them and decide, make us ready to pounce on them when they came into the actual product. So yeah, just an analogy there that I kind of like. The right to be forgotten is, as we heard yesterday, is obviously a chicken and egg question. How do you remember someone that you want to forget? Which, if we never restored databases and we never had problems and things never went down, I don't think this would be too much of an issue. But, if you got a database and you go delete someone from it, obviously they're gone from the database and they're gone. But what happens if you then go and restore that database from last week when the person didn't want to be forgotten and they come back into the database? So what do? Do you keep a list of people you want to forget and end up storing them, actually remembering them more because they want to be forgotten? What can you do? Maybe you could store some GUID or some key that relates back to that person's information, and as part of your restore process, you could just go, yeah, I'll restore my database, and then I'll run this script that actually make sure that the data that I want to be gone is actually gone. It's a problem, and I'm sure if any of you have got the answers, people would love to hear about it, and it might even make you quite a bit of money. So let's talk about moving and changing data. And we talked a bit there about moving data from production environments into non-production environments. So what are our options? Clearly, we don't want to just take a copy and put it there. We might want to do some stuff to it to get rid of data we don't want in there. And that might not be just names and addresses. There might be data in there that we can actually get rid of. There might be things like photographs that'll have metadata on them that will identify individuals. So it'd be a good idea to maybe get rid of that in the first place. Maybe email addresses. Get rid of them. We don't want to be sending out, emails to people unnecessarily. That'll get us a big fine in Europe. But the photo thing is interesting because, as part of your process, you might want to say, so all the photos in the database, they're gone, but maybe you want to replace them photographs. So there are websites you can go to nowadays that will give you a list of pictures of people that have never actually existed. So using AI and machine learning and that sort of thing, they've managed to generate pictures of people that have never walked on this planet at all. But even using like cartoon images, if you need to use images in the database, maybe you should replace them. Just so they don't have metadata in there. Get rid of the data you don't need. But obviously there's still going to be data in there that you actually probably want to stay in there. Things like names, that's an obvious one. So what are the tools we can use to do that? And we've got some things open to us. We can generate our own data. That would be like, I think, the gold-plated standard. So if we never, ever took our production database and put it in development, that would be great. If we just generated data in a database that looked and felt like our production data, but actually had nothing to do with it at all. And if we've seen a bug over here in production, we could analyze it and replicate it over here, so we'd never have to take data between the two. But that's not probably that realistic for a lot of companies. And if it is, it's probably something that we'd have to work at for a while to get to that place. But is there anything else we can do? Well, we can look at data masking, and the choice I guess we've got there is, do we use static data masking? Do you want to use dynamic data masking? Dynamic data masking came into the product in 2016. But I personally, if I've got to do this, prefer to statically data mask the data. And all that means is changing a name from, say, Martin to Fred, or changing it to James. But it's a one-time process. So when it happens, it's kind of irreversible. It basically says, we've got Martin here, we're going to go pick a random name from a list over here, and it might choose James, but it's not reversible. So if someone got my database and opened it up and seen the name James there, they could never get it back to Martin. Probably a couple of other things to be aware of. You might want to take individuals out of your database that are clearly identifiable by other attributes. And some of those other attributes might be, they earn a lot of money. Or, like if we had a database from, say, Microsoft, I'm sure we could probably identify people like Bill Gates and Satya in there because their remuneration was absolutely huge. But let's have a look at data masking and see, is there any way that we can actually do it ourselves? Now, I'm not suggesting you build your own stuff, but there are ways that you can go about it. So let's have a look at some T-SQL to maybe do that for us. So I'll duplicate my desktop. Okay. Right, so for this demo, what I'm going to do is hopefully use Azure Data Studio. So hopefully a lot of you, who's been to a session this week on Azure Data Studio? So yeah, okay, not many people, but who's never used Azure Data Studio? Okay, it's not just for Azure, it's for connect to on-prem SQL Server, Postgres, a lot of other things. If you've never seen it, I'll do my demo in it. That's not really the reason I'm showing it, but go away and have a look at it. It's not an alternative to Management Studio, but I think there are things in here that you might like. So for this is quite simple, but I'm going to use 3 databases. Okay, so the first database I'm going to need is obviously the database that contains our sensitive data. And I'll explain the other 2 databases as we go on. So, okay, so quick run through for Azure Data Studio. We can put text up the top. We just choose a text cell up here. And then in the cell underneath, we can use a code cell. I choose to use SQL, but we can use other things if we want up there as well. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is basically make sure that databases don't exist and create them if they do. I'll give this notebook away. This is actually a notebook. What We can use this like Management Studio as well, but this is a notebook. Probably great for blogging things as well. So in our sensitive data database, I'm going to create a persons table. We've actually seen this database before, but and in the persons table, I'm just going to put a load of first names and last names. Now, I'll show this data later properly, but these are obviously the names, or sensitive names. These are the names we're going to want to change. Okay, so that's our sensitive database out the way. So let's just look at the data in there. And we can also see in the notebook that underneath the code cell, we actually see the data. So the data's there for us to see, and this is the sensitive data that we're going to mask. So let's now create our the database that we're going to use to mask the data. And all we need is basically lists of data. So I'm just using this for first names and last names, but you can use this for anything. You just need a list of phone numbers or a list of things that look like social security numbers or something like that. So we'll create our data lists table there, and we'll populate that table, those first names and last names, with just some random data. So in my first names table, I've actually got two columns. I've actually got a name and whether the person's male, female, or I've used an X as like a non-binary gender. So I'm going to put that data in the database. So that's our second database out the way. And now this is the interesting stuff, so to speak. This is the third database. So in the third database, this is where we're going to put our logic to change that data. So before I do anything, I'll just run a select statement to show how that data could change. It's not an update statement yet, it's just a select statement. So we'll see there that all I'm doing is cross-applying a query, selecting from our sensitive data table and cross-applying something from our data lists table to pick the first one, to order randomly, but pick the top name and change it. So there we see Cyril's changed to Martin. If I run that again, we can see, this time Cyril's changed to Philip, and this time it's changed to Graham, and we can run this over and over again. Obviously, this is a simple example. You could probably put a few other smarts in here to make sure maybe names don't come up again. But if you've got a big list of names, that's kind of unlikely. Well, it's possible. And we're just going to do exactly the same with our last names. So our last names are a bit more straightforward. We just actually picked a random name. With our other query, what I've actually done is made sure, a male name goes to a male name, or it at least goes to a name that can be used as male and female. A female name goes to a female, so on. So that our data in the database, although it's not production data, it kind of looks and feels like it is production. So those two select statements, all we need to do now is actually change our select statements into an update statement. So we basically just cross-apply twice, and we'll run that. And so I've just got a query down here that will show the data. And I don't know if you remember the data, but this now has got totally different names in there. And finally, I'll just clean up and drop the database. So I showed Azure Data Studio for a couple of reasons. One was just to get it out there if people have not seen it before. But the main reason I showed it was because I could now go and give this notebook to anyone else, and I'll make this notebook available and you can use it. However, there is one thing I'll do to it before making it available. All this data here, all this data is now actually saved in the notebook. So if I was to give this notebook away as is, obviously you'd have this data in there. Now, this is obviously trivial, but if you're doing this in real life, that would be an issue for you. And that can be a good thing at times. You could just go and give this to your colleague. They don't even have to run it against a database, but they could see your results and whatever. So it's a great thing in development. But if you've done this sort of thing, to your production database, you don't want to be making this data available. So you can actually click on the cells, on the individual cells if you want, and you can clear the results. Yep. Or you can come up to the top and you can clear the results from the whole notebook. So I don't know, that is just one thing that we need to be aware of as DBAs, inadvertent data leakage. And it can happen accidentally with the best will in the world. Power BI is another one. If you import data into Power BI, then it's in the Power BI desktop file. If you want to give it away, you might be giving your data away as well. So clear it out. But yeah, I guess a lot of data breaches do come from things like inadvertent data access. So just be aware of that. Okay. So.
There's another way you can do that same thing
Yep.
with Windows functioning and with temp tables, and then you have nothing saved. You can actually take the column and put it into a Windows function random and just basically just kind of shake it up and then put it back in to the database if you don't care. And you can do it on address field, city, state. You do it on whatever field you want.
Yeah, so probably a lot of ways we can do a lot of these things. I guess the big question is, should we buy or should we build? One of the other reasons I showed that, because I cross-applied in line, I was able to use the new ID function and an order by. I would like to put that into like a table valued function, but because I've got those two things in there, I can't do that. So I have to do it in line. So there are quite a few ways for us to do it. But should we buy or should we build? So one of the tools I like to use for this sort of thing is Redgate, who are a sponsor in here. They've got a tool called Data Masker, which will do pretty much what you just seen for you. And it'll do so much more as well. You can actually write like little scripts in there to change phone numbers to other phone numbers that look like the original. So if you want to set an American phone number, you put in the like a regex expression for that particular phone number or an Australian phone number, social security number, whatever you want. And you can run that. You can either script it off using PowerShell, and then you can have a process to back up your production database, maybe restore it to your sanitized environment, run the PowerShell script that you've got from data generator, create a basically mask database, make sure all your production data is gone, back that up again, and make it available or put it in the test environment, the dev environment, wherever you like. So essentially, you can have a very strong process that you could run it every night. You could run it once a week, but and you can tighten that process up over time. You'll get to know your data. And one of the other things one of the other benefits it might have for your business is because the data the names and addresses and things will change so regularly, that might encourage your testers who are using that to look maybe a bit more closely at some of the data. Because one of the arguments that I've heard from clients for not doing this is like, our testers like to look at certain people that they've seen in the database that they're familiar with, which to me is like just an excuse for not wanting to do this sort of thing. So I'll just switch back to my extend. So that's data in non-production environments. And obviously you can use dynamic data masking as well, should you choose to do. And I think we've all seen examples of that with like credit cards where they only show the last 4 digits and all the other digits are asterisks. But you can make your own masking, your masking schema up if you want. So, yep. So, yep, different departments do have their own prod environments. So, yeah, when I say non-prod, I think you know what I mean. Yeah. So we obviously need a good policy around restores as well. We talked a little bit before about restoring databases and making sure people who want it to be forgotten are forgotten. That's going to be a big problem. Hopefully you get the answers to that. But there's going to be SLAs and what you have around that sort of thing. So be aware of them. I think basically this comes down a lot to common sense, for want of a better word. And I think when you hear people like the keynote speaker yesterday describing some of these things, or some of the things that I've described today, they're kind of obvious. But we're so busy with other things that we're potentially overlooking some of the obvious stuff. And when we've got to do it then, because we don't do it all the time, it takes us a long time to do. Whereas if we get into the habit of having a good process to do this sort of thing, then maybe it'll become like second nature to us, almost trivial. So yeah, to summarize, just a few basic things, you know. Have a good process. Even like yourself, going to websites and that, creating passwords, putting them in a password safe, making sure you can get the password out, and making sure it's correctly in the safe before you do anything else. That's probably a great thing to do. And it'll save you so much stress when you're searching around for passwords at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And just adopting a new mindset to like how people audit or monitor our applications and our databases. Don't look at them as tools to catch your developers and your DBAs out. Look at them tools to like help you get a better process, to help you educate your team, and ultimately make your jobs and your lives a little bit better. Look at the hard problems. If you come up with answers, we'd love to hear them. And yeah, I think we're just about out of time. Martin Kearney down the road if you are interested in more of this stuff. Tom's got some great stuff on encryption. Really have a look at that. Not something that people do every day, but like anything, once you get to know something and practice it for a while, it's second nature, so that when you do have to do it under time pressure, you're not messing around Googling and doing all that sort of thing. So thank you very much for getting up early at 8 o'clock and coming down here and listening to me ramble on for the last hour. Have a great rest of the session and have a safe trip home. Thanks.